What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Elton John, and this is another one included in a suite of songs provided by great friend of the channel, Kim, in relation to a handful of related concepts, both short-term and long-term, and indeed, this song seems to express in regard to both of those temporal frameworks. And it's The King Must Die from Elton John, which is a tune included by Kim under the subheading of Hope, which is to say she organized the songs in relation to a handful of related and chronological themes. And she did make the observation that the way this song could be hopeful certainly depends on the manner in which you look at it. But yes, the idea of a king having to die is, of course, more hopeful if the king is corrupt and oppressive and exploitative and dishonest, and thus looking forward to a time when, for biological or other reasons, the king will indeed die, and thus that particular reign will come to an end, could be a way to keep a positive mindset at a time when it is very hard to do otherwise. It seems very relevant now. And of course, the idea of the mortality of all humans, even the most politically elite and culturally vaunted, is of course a hallmark of us biological creatures, meaning, and to sort of borrow a line from, or a concept from Hamlet and thus Shakespeare, the idea that the pauper and the king will both one day be food for worms is, I think, the great equalizer. So yeah, it feels, again, not only very perceptive to refer to the mortality of every human, including kings, but again, if you're living in a kingdom, whether literal or figurative, in which that king is exercising authority beyond what is granted to him by the political system in question, then thinking that the king one day must die would indeed be hopeful. So let's give it a listen. This is from 1970, Elton John, The King Must Die, and away we go.
No man's just a playing Shakespeare round your throne room floor, while the juggler's act is danced upon the crowd that you once wore.
Alas, poor Yorick.
Your courtiers cannot be called best friends. Caesar's had your troubles, widows had to cry. One mercenary's employs to sing, and the king must die. Take my word and go, but tell the ostler that his name was the very first they chose. And if my hands will stay forever, and the altar should refuse me, yeah, Would you let me in? Would you let me in? Would you let me in? Should I cry sanctuary? Caesar's had your troubles, Will's had to cry. One lesson rising twice the same, and the king must die. Yeah, the king must die. The king must die. Oh, yeah. No man's a jester playing Shakespeare round your throne room floor, while the juggler's act is danced upon the crown that you once wore. The king is dead. The king is dead. The king is dead. The king is dead. Long live the
Long live the Queen as well. Wow. Okay, so a lot to say. Number one, immediately we get reference to Shakespeare and a king's court, which of course makes me think of the scene that I was... Well, I guess it's a different scene, because he's saying the food for worms Hamlet is saying to Claudius, but ultimately it makes me think of the scene with the gravedigger who's, talking about poor Yorick, and apparently Yorick was not altogether nice to the gravedigger, but yes, the idea that, it's not just the jester or the juggler or the courtiers who will ultimately expire, but the king himself. And then by the end of the track, it's like we've moved ahead in time. The king is dead. There's a chronological progression. And of course, the reference to Caesar, and it's interesting, I did a reaction to another tune tonight called Leaders of Men, which I couldn't help but think of, but yeah, the idea that, again, these huge, significant figures, they and their reigns and even their kingdoms on a long enough timeline will come to an end, and so whether that's cause for chaos or commiseration, or indeed jubilation, celebration, or relief is, of course, dependent, number one, on perspective, but on the character of that king and the kingdom that they lead. So, obviously, we have to comment on Elton's incredibly soulful vocals. I had a sense he was a good singer going into this deep dive, but just after a handful of tunes, his vocals, certainly, going way back, are more impressive and florid and expressive than I ever knew. So that is really standing out to me with his work. The piano, just that simple, I guess, I don't know about composition directly, so I don't know how simple it is, but in terms of how it hits my ears and brain, it's not an overly elaborate piano melody, but it had a lot of emotion in it. So simple in terms of its functional sound, but very sonorous and engaging in terms of the melodic riff to it. But yes, mixed with these like drum fills and rolls, and there was a very dynamic feel melodically and percussively over the course of the tune. And again, that could be a conceptual expression of the idea that, there's no, what's the right word? The nature of life is that, you don't ever get to be in a particular groove or a particular sound for that long. Eventually, through health or dramatic events or just the passage of time itself, different phases and different parts of a trajectory will eventually manifest. So, yeah, it feels like there's some musical expression of some of the themes at play. And as I said, Elton's voice at the center of it, just magical. So, a really cool tune. Ultimately, I'm curious to hear any other context, and I think there are aspects of the lyrics that I didn't quite pick up on first listen, so I look forward to Kim and others commenting. Once again, thank you to Kim for providing this sequence of tunes, and we're almost done. I think there's one or two left, so yes, I'll look forward to that. I think there's one more, and then a Mark Allman track, so yes, looking forward to the conclusion of this excursion through a handful of related songs. Do let me know what you think of this one, and I will see you next time. Peace.